Welcome back to Season 3 of How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is brought to you by Squad Help, the world's #1 naming platform. Today's guest is Jeremy Miller, author of the best-selling book, Sticky Branding. He's also the founder of a strategic branding and business development consultancy with the same name, Sticky Branding. One thing that makes Jeremy different from most strategists I've talked to is the way he got into this industry. He was working in his family business, a Toronto-based recruiting firm, when the business started to fail. He diagnosed the problem, recognized the need for a rebrand, and long story short, he helped turn the company around, and in 2013, it sold. In 2015, he published Sticky Branding, in which he shares what he learned from that experience, as well as his decade-long study of other companies and how they grow recognizable, memorable brands. And now, Jeremy's got a new book, and it's about a topic near and dear to my heart, naming. When I first reached out to Jeremy, I didn't even know about the new book, or I might have had him on Season 1, which, as you recall, was all about naming. So on this episode, you'll hear us cover a lot of ground. We talked about brand strategy, brand experience, sticky branding, and the new book, Brand New Name. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Jeremy Miller. Here it is. Jeremy Miller, thank you so much for joining me.
Rob, it's a pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
I want to start out with a question that's going to sound like I'm putting you on the spot, but I'll explain in a minute. So with respect to your business, Sticky Branding, how would you describe who you are, what you do, and who you serve in 10 words or less?
Well, Sticky Branding helps companies build their brands through tools, programs, services, and books.
Okay, great. I didn't count, but that sounded like 10 or less. And
should be in that order.
Of course, the reason I ask it, and the reason I ask it that way, is because that's the first principle in your book, Sticky Branding. It's called Simple Clarity, and it recommends that companies be able to describe themselves in about 10 words. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that's important and how it's different from other concepts that we've heard in the world of branding and brand positioning?
Sure. So if you think of Simple Clarity, it is like a label on a file folder in your customer's mind. It is just a simple way for someone to retrieve what you are, who you are. And you think of how you shop. Say you're going to the grocery store and you want to buy dish detergent. You're not going to walk all of the aisles. You're going to walk to the dish detergent aisle, and then you're going to choose which product that you normally buy. And the same thing happens when you buy for an accounting service or a marketing service or anyone else. And a large part of where this comes from is Google. Mm-hmm. Google has really shaped the way we look for things anymore. So we used to come at it as marketers with a unique selling proposition. How do we catch someone so we're memorable and then repeat it over and over again through advertising? But with Google, we now are conditioned to look for things by category. So I believe Simple Clarity is the way you categorize yourself or your brand so that somebody can recall that or refer that really, really quickly. And it's surprisingly difficult. I struggle with it constantly with sticky branding, but it is, to me, the foundation of your brand, because once you have that kind of messaging, now you can get your website aligned. You can get your campaigns aligned. You can get your salespeople aligned. It just sets a strong platform to market from.
How critical is differentiation in that 10-word phrase? You know, we hear so much about you have to have, like you said, a unique selling proposition or a different take on what you do. Is that critical? Or when you talk about Simple Clarity, is it really just, let's not focus on differentiation. Let's just say what we do.
Say what we do. Okay. I think differentiation comes second because what the problem is, let's look at a very popular program right now, which is StoryBrand. I think Don Miller has created something that is absolutely remarkable. Make the customer the hero, focus on what makes you different. The problem is, if you don't say what you are to start, then what are you differentiating? We need that first anchor in order to then explain why. Sticky Branding, my book, is used in a group of schools as part of the entrepreneurial program. And I chatted with a group of students recently, and they said, our problem is when we are trying to brand, say, our school, well, in Ohio, there's a dozen or more liberal arts colleges. So what makes us different? And I said, doesn't matter. What really matters first and foremost is you own your category. And then when someone knows that, then you can explain you're different. I think there's an order to things.
So using your Google analogy, it's sort of like the simple clarity statement is what they use as a search term, and maybe the differentiation takes place once they actually arrive at your page, and presumably a couple of other pages that might have come up. That's when they're kind of comparison shopping.
100%. Yep, you've nailed it.
So can you share any other examples of simple clarity type statements, whether they're from big companies we would have heard of or clients of yours, or even just kind of hypothetical examples?
Sure. Well, I'll give you two. Where the origin of all this actually came from was in my family business. And in the early 2000s, I joined my family's recruiting business, and we tried to rebrand the company because of a whole set of changes that were going in our industry. We didn't know it at the time, but basically recruiting has been following a very similar trajectory to the travel industry. LinkedIn is to Expedia. Mm-hmm. And so we were forced to reinvent ourselves. Now, the word recruiter came in with so much baggage, and you got negative terms like headhunter and other things that are wrapped up with it. So thinking I could differentiate the firm, I spent all this time trying to rebrand the business. And what I discovered was nothing worked until we actually said what we were, which was a sales recruiter in Toronto. And when we did that and put that on Google, the phone started ringing. When we said that at a networking event, people would come up and talk to us. That simple phrase, sales recruiter Toronto, set the entire organization up for success. And so that was where I got started on this. And I've seen dozens of examples since then. One of my favorites, though, is a company called Cardinal Couriers. They're a shipping company. So Cardinal Couriers would say, we are a logistics or a shipping organization. And then what they do is they say, we specialize in pre-8 a.m. delivery. So their category is pre-8 a.m. delivery for shipping. And that simple statement immediately differentiates Cardinal from FedEx and UPS and DHL and everyone else in the space.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the principles in the book. The full title, I should say, is Sticky Branding, 12 and a half Principles to Stand Out, Attract Customers, and Grow an Incredible Brand. So we've talked about that first principle, which was simple clarity, but the whole book is broken out into 4 parts, 3 principles each. There's a half principle at the end. So let's dig into a couple of the other principles. The third one is function that resonates. That was one that resonated with me. It's interesting because it goes deeper than what a lot of people think of when they think of brand. It's not the color palette. It's not a tagline. Can you talk a little bit about what function that resonates means?
Sure. I think you build your brand from the inside out. It's in the quality of your services. It's how you innovate in your customer engagement. And so where a brand gets eroded is when it's commoditized, when it's the same as everyone else. And at that point, they're competing on price, relationships, and availability. And so how do you win when everyone looks the same? And so the question, the answer is, how do you change your value proposition? And what Function That Resonates argues is that a key way to grow a competitive advantage is looking at how you can take your core services and add on additional value adds to create a net new category or subcategory. So I'll give you a very specific example of this. One of the companies in the book is called the Central Group, and they are a packager and manufacturer of corrugated end caps, displays, in-aisle type of packaging solutions. And they would sell to big companies like Mars and L'Oreal and those types of places.
So they're making the display that the Mars products go into?
Correct. So when you go into a grocery store and you see those little in-aisle displays, they would be manufacturing those.
Got it.
Problem is manufacturing cardboard and making a pretty box is relatively commoditized. There's hundreds of manufacturers across North America that all do a relatively good job at the same price. And so it is an established market. What Central did brilliantly is they said what most of the competitors are doing is treating the art of in-aisle displays as a black art. And what they said is we can prove which kind of boxes, which kind of designs will actually move sales. And so they created an entire consumer testing lab inside of their office to demonstrate which kinds of designs were going to have the most effect. So they could go to a large brand and say, you're going to be launching XYZ products. So say it is Colgate and they're going to do a new line of toothpaste. Well, rather than just guessing, because it's a major launch, let's do a realm of consumer testing. Let's look at what kind of displays and color options and placement will work best and create the answer. And then we will manufacture to whatever spec consumer testing does.
Great.
What they've essentially done to create Function That Resonates is they took consumer testing and manufacturing and merged it together under one purchase. And that kind of thinking is, how can we give the customer the answers that they're looking for? And when you do that, that's brand building. That's innovation, because now you are solving problems that may not have been recognized, but are being drilled down in a way that someone else will value, and that creates a gap between you and everyone else.
So if somebody's listening and hears that example, and it's a great example that presumably worked really well for that company, and they're thinking, I love that, but I can't apply exactly the same logic to my own company. How do you recommend companies or brand leaders go about figuring out or even looking for a function that resonates that they could add to their own brand or their own business?
Well, what I would recommend is you look at what the customer needs are. What problems are you trying to solve? And I would actually ask you to look at a book. Clayton Christensen has a book called Competing Against Luck, and it's the story of innovation and customer choice. And he talks about the research that McDonald's did in why were people buying milkshakes first thing in the morning. And it turns out they wanted a breakfast that filled boredom. Like you can suck on that thing for half an hour and have breakfast. Not healthy, but customers didn't care about that.
Yeah, well, this is in America, I'm assuming. So,
yeah,
so
of course.
Less of a care.
Yeah, so you get your sugary milk product,
Uh-huh.
and it's solving a problem. And what Central Group did is they looked to their customer and helped solve a problem. One of the things that I have found is that what you're trying to ask is look from the customer's perspective, what the solution perspective is, and then start working backwards. Rather than trying to do what everyone in your category or industry is doing, try to actually solve problems. I can see this in my own business, for example. Within Sticky Branding, we are combining leadership development with marketing and business strategy. So we are combining HR consulting and brand consulting under one. And the reason for that is in the mid-market, the Achilles heel to brand building is actually sitting within the management team. When you go from 10 million to 50 million to 100 million, you're going from a tribal leadership culture to a professionally managed culture to an executive culture. And if that team can't change and evolve, then the brand strategy actually starts to blow apart. So we've been creating our own function that resonates by combining executive coaching and leadership development in part of our programs.
Interesting.
So the answer is look at the customer, what the needs are versus your competitors.
Right. Let's talk about another principle. It's called total brand experience. And I'm trying to have conversations in this season of the podcast about brand experience. So of course that principle stuck out to me. But the way you've written about it, it's about looking at every customer touch point and asking yourself whether there are ways to improve the experience and delight customers. I'm just curious if when you really dig into the details, if you're working on a project with a client, is there a way of categorizing or conceptualizing all of those touch points just to make sure that you're not leaving anything off the table or that your clients aren't missing anything when they're assessing that customer journey?
Yeah, you're naming it. It's the customer journey. It's journey mapping.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're looking at is from the customer's life cycle, from the purchase behavior through to how they become a customer to how they leave you, is mapping out what are those critical engagement points. Now, you can get overly detailed on this.
Uh-huh.
And I think what really matters are what are those key moments where you are creating a memorable experience, or where are those key moments when you can influence a memorable experience? Zappos is a good example. The big resistance point to buying shoes, at least 10 years ago when they were launching, was how do you try on a bunch of pairs risk-free? So by offering free shipping both ways for up to a year, solved a key customer challenge, and by making both the purchase and return seamless and effort-free was that touch point that was a high-value connection. So map the customer journey, look at the key areas where you're touching them, and then ask more specifically, what are those moments that you can influence to either create a positive experience or to reduce risk?
This episode of How Brands Are Built is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. Here's how SquadHelp works. You launch a naming contest to engage hundreds of naming experts. You're guided through an agency-level naming process that goes beyond traditional crowdsourcing. The platform uses AI and includes name validation features like audience testing, trademark validation, linguistic analysis, and quality scoring. And SquadHelp doesn't just do naming. You can also use their platform for taglines or slogans, as well as logo design. To launch your naming contest today, go to squadhelp.com and start receiving custom name suggestions instantly. Squad Help, company, brand, and business name ideas by experts. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rev.com, offering fast, affordable, accurate audio transcriptions and captions. I use Rev all the time. I use it to transcribe episodes of this podcast, which you can find at howbrandsarebuilt.com, but I also use it for recorded interviews that I conduct during brand strategy projects. I've tried some of the other services, and I keep coming back to Rev because their transcriptions are the most accurate that I've seen. Their turnaround time is sometimes less than 24 hours, and the transcriptions cost just $1 a minute. Right now, Rev is offering listeners of this show $10 off on your first order. To get the $10 off coupon, visit rev.com/blog/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's rev.com/blog/HBAB. Rev, transcriptions made simple. I'm struck by the fact that in the Zappos example and the example you gave with the Central Group, both of those changes that they made to their business cost them money, right? I mean, that's an investment that they have to make, especially for Zappos, to cover the cost of that shipping. I just wonder how often you're put in the place of convincing clients that yes, there will be a sort of a down payment on this, but it will reap rewards on the tail end in terms of customer loyalty.
This is the business of brand building, that brand building is an investment. This is what David Ocker taught us for the last 20 years, that these are core skills and assets. Let's look at another big example, Apple. Apple is always credited for its design, but their most important asset or competitive advantage is in their supply chain. So when they were launching the iPhone, they bought up all the 5-inch display screens that were available so that Samsung and no one else could actually have a similar sized phone. That yes, to create competitive advantage is an investment. You are making strategic investments in terms of your assets or skills or people so that you can create a better experience for your customers. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're not in the brand building game.
Good point. So once you've identified all the touch points on that customer journey, is it as simple as sitting back and saying, here are the key moments on that journey? How can we improve them? Or, what's wrong with them? Or is there more to it? I mean, what steps do business owners take to just ensure that they're creating a great brand experience?
I think of the total quality experience or the total brand experience and the total customer experience as total quality management. Everything that you create in the planning stage or at the boardroom is a hypothesis. Until you get it out into the world and get data, get customer feedback, and actually see what moves the sales needle, then you're not really getting anything validated. So when you look at the total customer experience, it's a living strategy. It is constantly evolving. You're constantly improving. You're responding to what's going on in the marketplace. Zappos offering free shipping both ways is probably table stakes now in the e-commerce world. Everybody does that. So what's happening is as you innovate, your competitors are copying you, and we're standing on whatever that is as a convention. So you're constantly, every year, taking a step back to look at what's working, what isn't working, and making shifts and adjustments to further improve your brand.
Yeah, I love that idea of thinking of it as trial and error and constant tweaking and measuring. Let's talk about some of the exercises that you have in the Sticky Branding book. And then I'm excited to pivot and talk a little bit about a new book. But just last question on Sticky Branding. After each of those principles, I love how you have some just immediate, simple exercises that your readers can kind of do as homework. I'm just curious, out of all of those exercises in the book, is there one or two that you found especially effective or that are just favorites of yours?
One of my absolute favorites is on brand metaphors. And that is chapter 3, I believe. And what you're looking for in that is, how do you create a core metaphor for your organization? And and this comes from research from Gerald Zaltman on the idea of deep metaphors. There's 7 core deep metaphors, from control and journey to container and others. And these are metaphors that are used across all cultures, all races, all areas of the world. Like you think of journey. journey. It is something that we all can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And so by digging down and discovering what your brand's deep metaphors are, gives you a very interesting insight in how you can build long-term relationships with your customers. And I love the exercise itself because it's really fun. You get customers to tell their origin story using pictures, and it gives you some really compelling insights into how you're going to tell your story going forward.
What's one example of that for sticky branding or for Leap Job or just anything out there that might help explain how that works?
So at Leap Job, we did the research, and what we discovered was that a career is like a journey, that when people are talking around their career, they're stuck, they're moving towards retirement, they're moving forward in all of these elements. It's very much a progressionary way to think of your life. And what we did through that research is we were able to pull that backwards to say if your career is like a journey, we could bake that into the name. The name is called Leap Job, and we had a brand identity based of a frog in motion. He was always in the air. He was always leaping forward. And we also used that metaphor to frame how we communicated. We wanted this positive, uplifting motion. And so we used the journey metaphor and really baked it into the idea of leap. The other one that I think is just a classic big company example is Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers' core metaphor is balance, and it's best represented when Oprah invested in Weight Watchers,
Yeah.
and she did the it's a Twitter video where she said, "I love bread." And then she spent 3 minutes talking about bread. And you're like, what is going on? But what she said is, I love bread. And with Weight Watchers, I can eat bread. It just allows me to control how much I have. I eat it in balance. I eat it in proportion. And so what the Weight Watcher point system does is allow you to have everything you want in balance. And by owning that, they have a category position, whereas Jenny Craig would be control. We don't think you can make good choices, so we're going to give you the food you should eat.
Right. Great. Well, let's talk about your new book. And I should say, when I first reached out to you, I was familiar with sticky branding, but of course couldn't have known that you had this new book in the works. So it's funny to be talking to you about naming. Naming is, for listeners, the topic of the whole first season of this podcast. I talked to 9 or 10 professional namers and naming experts, and now I get to add another naming expert to the list here. So your upcoming book is called Brand New Name, a proven step-by-step process to create an unforgettable brand name. First question is just what motivated you to write the book?
I think brand naming is a cornerstone topic that everyone has to name something. Every entrepreneur, every marketer, we all have to name something at least once. But when you go onto Amazon, there's only about 4 books on the topic. And it seems to be a completely underserved topic. And I get on my website over 2,000 to 3,000 unique visitors every single week coming to me on the topic of brand naming. And I didn't have good answers for them because you could go hire a naming consultant and spend tens of thousands of dollars, or you can do it yourself and figure it out. But where was the practical, it's like sticky branding's origin as well, is where was the practical guide that would show someone how to name something and do it really well with solid process and inspiration and examples and give them the tools they need. And as a marketer and as a person very passionate about this category, how do we elevate the category of brand naming so that everyone knows that it's really important and they should do it really well?
Yeah, there is a surprising dearth of books, as you mentioned. And I should also say, because of this conversation, I'll put together a list of what is out there, as far as I know, in terms of books about brand naming. And of course, we'll add your book to that list. But I've found about 5 that seem to be really whole books about brand naming. And some of those are more sort of storytelling about big brands and how they got their names. Only a couple are really helpful in terms of how should you actually go about this.
And probably 3 of those are out of print.
Yeah, that may be true. I've had trouble tracking some of them down. You advocate a different way of going about it, I think. So you talk about unlocking the creative genius of your employees in order to come up with a great brand name. Can you talk about that? Why recommend that approach versus some of the other ones you just mentioned, like just trying to do it yourself or hiring one of the naming firms out there?
Sure. Well, I think the key to naming, whether you do it yourself or with a firm or anyone else, is process. That naming is not a black art. You need a structure in terms of how you build your strategy, how you do your ideation, how you do your testing. And so that's the most fundamental piece to it. Now, where my approach starts to get unique and interesting is I fundamentally believe that in every single organization is immense creative talent, and much of that talent goes untapped. And so what I have set out to do is rather than crowdsourcing externally and using strangers to help you name your brand, use the people that are actually working inside your business, the people who are passionate and want to make a difference, that actually know the stories, and give them a process where they can actually co-create and work with you to name the brand, whether it's the company name, a product name, a service name, whatever it is. When you get your team involved, not only you're going to come up with something brilliant, you're actually going to create a culture shift and get people more connected to what they're building. And so few branding projects ever connect people at any side of the organization into the brand building process. And if we can do that once, we actually have the power to really create a powerful moment inside the organization.
You mentioned crowdsourcing there, and I think you were distinguishing between external crowdsourcing services like Squad Help, and so I think there may be a couple others, versus internal. But would you distinguish also at all between sort of an internal crowdsourcing or even a contest, which we've heard of naming contests run within organizations, versus the process that you're advocating?
I would call what I'm advocating employee co-creation, which is a structured methodology to use your internal employees to name, test, and select a brand name. And the principles of this draw a little bit from what Jake Knapp and the Google Ventures team has done with Sprint and design thinking and other areas. And so rather than a randomized contest, I think one of the other key insights that has come out of my research is that while everyone is creative, most of our creative skill sets have atrophied. And there's been 2 long-term studies that have demonstrated that: the Flynn test of IQ and the Torrance test of creativity. Now, according to the Flynn test, IQ scores have been going up every single decade for over a century. Basically, each new generation, IQ scores are going up by 10 points. But according to the Torrance test, since 1990, creativity scores have been declining. And there's a whole host of reasons for that, from the way we structure our school system to the way we work, our lack of time, our addiction to screens. All of that's affecting creativity. So the problem I have with generic crowdsourcing is it assumes that everyone is naturally creative. Well, the problem is they are, but they don't know how to use those creative skills. So in employee co-creation, what we're doing is giving very disciplined structure and guidance on how to actually create names and think through the process so that people can make a meaningful contribution versus randomly showing up and throwing invented words at the wall.
Right. So I take it then that there's a little bit of training involved and guiding and some specific exercises sort of designed to tease out that creativity, as opposed to the blanket, just, come up with name ideas and send them to this email address and we'll pick the best.
100%. So the way a brand new name is organized is a 3-step sprint. So the first week, what you do is you build your strategy, analyze your market, look towards naming trends, define what it takes to create an unforgettable name. We also, in that week, assemble your creative team. And in that, there's really 2 parts. You're going to have a core team of 3 to 10 people that are responsible for doing the naming exercises. And you have an opportunity to extend that to everyone else inside of your organization if you are in a larger business. Now, the core to the creative process is the 5-day naming sprint. And what the book gives you every day is a daily exercise with action items, inspiration, and a quota. And the key to this is both the exercise and the quota. When you assign people a number and say, we need 5 good names per day for 5 days with structure, it sets the behaviors that you're actually looking for to be more disciplined in the naming process. And then there's a few other techniques that we apply in order to increase the quality and additive ideation that goes on from group brainstorming.
And then that third phase, so you mentioned phase 1 is, I think you call it plan. Phase 2 is sprint. What was that third phase?
The third phase is select. And so in the third phase, what we are doing is shortlisting, getting rid of all the non-starters, creating a short list of 3 to 10 candidates to then test. We put what the book provides as a name scoring tool, which is a weighted matrix to analytically evaluate your names, plus 3 consumer testing steps that you can do. And they're designed to be quick and dirty in the way that anyone can execute, but get some decent information and some guidance on how you can use that data to make the final selection.
Great. Well, I look forward to the book coming out and giving it a good read and adding it to that list. I have a few wrap-up questions. What's a brand that, and it could be one of the examples you've already given or something from one of your books, but what's a brand you think is doing almost everything right from a brand strategy, brand experience, naming standpoint?
There's a few. One of my favorites right now is Slack. I think Slack is just an incredible name. It's a quirky name. You'd think it's a flawed name in context, but Slack creates space. And so in the team environment, it has done so well. And you look at how well that team has grown the brand. It's actually Stuart Butterfield, who founded Flickr, is the CEO of Slack. And just how far he has grown as a leader. And we're going to see Slack go IPO this year, and it's just immense value, immense product, immense branding, and immense naming. Like, check the boxes. Like, that's a great brand.
You've mentioned a couple of books just in the course of this conversation. I can tell you're a big reader as well as a writer. So beyond what you've already mentioned, any books that you would recommend to people in the world of branding or just marketers who know they need to work on their brand?
I think my favorite branding book of all time is still the classic, which is Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout. I think it set the category.
Yeah, I had the privilege of speaking to Laura Ries, daughter of Al Ries, about that book and about positioning in general. And she mentioned that they're coming out with a new version of that. So I'd say that my only kind of issue with that book is it feels pretty dated. Whenever I recommend it, I say, give it a read, but note that it's going to feel like it's a little out of date. So it sounds like they're correcting for that.
Yeah, it's still timeless, and I think it's still like anything, it will continue to evolve. The other book I would throw out there is not a traditional branding book. It's called Playing to Win by Roger Martin and A.J. Lafley. And it is former CEO of Procter & Gamble and the former dean of the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Mm-hmm. It's my favorite strategy book. And it's where those questions, where do you play, how do you win, come from. And I have been drawing more and more from the core strategy field to influence branding than the marketing field.
Great. That sounds like a great read. Last question. Any advice for junior people or people interested in getting into branding as a career or people that are already in it but just looking to grow?
I think the key thing I look at is get really good at business. Because for me, successful businesses create successful brands and never the other way around. I think a lot of time we spend too much energy looking at logos, taglines, colors, campaigns, and not asking the strategic questions of how do we actually serve our customers brilliantly? How do we create a competitive advantage? And I think if marketers spent more time actually looking at business strategy, they would be able to deliver even better creative. So let's look at the business so that we can actually do better at what we do.
I love that advice. And, you hear a lot of brand people talking about the merging or the interplay between brand strategy and business strategy. But it's clear that you're really walking the walk on that and not just talking the talk. And it's clear in your books and everything you've said today. So thank you for that reminder and that advice.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you liked the episode, please leave a rating and review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Jeremy, Sticky Branding, and the new book, Brand New Name, visit stickybranding.com. You can also check out the Sticky Branding group on LinkedIn. The new book comes out tomorrow, October 8th. You can buy either of Jeremy's books on Amazon or lots of other places. As usual, I'll post my notes from the interview with Jeremy and a full transcript at howbrandsarebuilt.com. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time.